Hey, it's Mike here, and today I'm outside because it was just too nice, so I'm out here among the birds. I've got my harmless threads, eat your own leg shirt on, so let's do this. Some of you may have seen my 10 vegan comebacks video. Well, it appears it was debunked by fitness YouTuber Chris Kruger. And he's making a lot of points that I keep hearing lately that I haven't specifically addressed, like how grass-fed beef diets kill less animals than vegan diets do. He also mentions that vegans' higher blood levels of protein isn't good, which will be an interesting thing to talk about. And he also makes some just very scientifically wrong, demonstrably wrong claims.
A gorilla has a colon the size of a football. You have one the size of a pinky.
So let's go. Let's do this.
This video is a response to Mike the Vegan. He is one of my favorite vegan YouTubers. He's obviously a likable guy. He makes funny videos. He makes great content. But Mike the Vegan just gets the facts wrong.
I appreciate the positive comments, but if you're really that nice, you wouldn't have used the disease filter on me for your thumbnail. Right off the bat, his video has like 4 or 5 links in the description, and none of them are studies. I just thought I would mention that. All right, let's hit on the first one, which was my response to the where do you get your protein thing, which is showing this chart that I made from data on a study showing that vegans have higher levels of serum albumin or free blood protein than people that eat meat. He actually tries to paint this higher level of blood protein as a bad thing. In fact, long-term damage, as he mentions in his title.
Mike's response is total baloney, homie. Higher blood albumin? You mean you have higher levels of incomplete protein floating around in your blood? That higher blood protein means you're malnourished.
But first of all, this was a point to prove that vegans are not at risk of protein deficiency on average. And it is the case that lower protein levels is what happens when you have a protein deficiency from this study. When talking about kwashiorkor, a severe form of protein energy malnutrition, how they have low serum albumin levels due to decreased supply of amino acids to the liver. Now, not getting enough amino acids results in low blood protein levels. Vegans, of course, further away from that point than people who eat meat, nullifying concern for a protein deficiency, which was the whole point in the first place. But you know, he goes and says that it's actually, these higher levels are because of these junk, vegan, crappy, plant-based, incomplete proteins.
Protein that your body can't use until you get more amino acids. And those amino acids can be found in meat.
No, the thing that he edited out of the response was that I mentioned that plants have all of the essential amino acids in the amounts that you need. I blast by those requirements for every single essential amino acid. It's easy if you eat enough calories and include legumes and nuts in your diet.
It also means that you are likely vitamin A deficient. A vegan diet has no vitamin A in it.
Then he read on Wikipedia that a vitamin A deficiency can cause high blood protein, and boom, of course, that's it. That's gotta be it. Deficiency vegan connected. The reality is that no, this masterful Wikipedia resource is not giving you the answer. Actually, from the study at least, vegans had no statistically significantly different level of vitamin A deficiency than those that ate meat. His case for vegans being vitamin A deficient is not based off data on vegan levels. It's based off how vegans eat beta-carotene and convert it to vitamin A. And we can do that so easily. There's so much vitamin A in things like sweet potatoes and carrots. There are people with genetically lower conversion, but again, they're eating so much that it is yet to be an issue, as this study demonstrates. No, the reality is that vegans have higher levels of free blood protein because they have lower levels of inflammation. And this is a protein, this is a building block. It's used for those C-reactive proteins, which is a marker of inflammation. From this study, vegans have 30% lower levels. And I'm not just making that up. Inflammation has been shown to lower levels of serum albumin from this study. Quote, inflammation was shown to reduce albumin levels irrespective of the patient's nutritional state. But zooming out, the biggest point here is that he's trying to paint these higher protein levels as some long-term damage when the reality is that it's the exact opposite. Having higher protein levels is a good thing from studies across the board, whether it is in terms of survival in critically ill people, survival in cancer, and so forth. You want those higher levels. From this study, patients with hyperalbuminemia, which is high blood protein, on admission and before discharge have the best short and long-term survival. But to be fair, we're not even talking about hyperalbuminemia where it's higher than the normal level. No, the vegan average was still within the normal healthy range. The next point in my original video was how to respond to people when they say that plants feel pain. And I don't need to show it to you again. It was really the main point that actually animals are sentient. We know they suffer. It's not an excuse to kill them.
This entirely misses the point. The real point is that no matter who you are, you cannot escape the circle of life.
No, you can't escape the circle of life. Nobody's trying to escape the circle of life. Vegans are just trying to choose a point in that circle where they do less harm to animals, where they don't pointlessly kill sentient animals that they don't need to, okay?
Life demands death, period. Every time you run your farm machinery to harvest your crops, you are killing all sorts of field mice. You're killing wild deer.
Let me get this straight. When people are telling vegans that plants feel pain, what they actually mean is that vegans cause animals pain. This isn't really a direct response, but he really gets into this notion later, so I'm going to wait to address that. But a quick point is that, yes, being alive will probably cause some death, and vegans are aware of that. They're not trying to be completely perfect. They're trying to suck less. They're trying to cause less harm to animals. That's their intention. But now we get onto the agricultural logistics stuff, and he says that, no, you actually need animals to create healthy soil.
What do you think those crops grow in? The fertile plains of America are only fertile because animals were on that land for millions of years.
This is very easily disproven with some basic logic. First of all, we had that large section of Earth's history where we had all of these plants without relying on these larger animals. They hadn't evolved yet, so how did those plants even live? How did they even grow out of the soil? I don't know. And then we also have places like Hawaii and New Zealand that didn't have these large mammals on them. The largest mammal on New Zealand was actually a bat. And I don't think that the entire island of New Zealand relied on bat guano to grow plants. Guanope. Yes, you have permission to stop watching after such a lame pun.
If you want to have fertile soil, then you need animals. Period.
I think you mixed up your language there. I think you meant to say you need animal periods. And in fact, I'd go further and say it's actually that you like animal periods. Oh, we're still talking about soil? My bad. In all seriousness, dude, have you heard of veganic agriculture? There are tons of farms growing vegetables or even larger scale production using no animal inputs. It's also known as stock-free farming. All of the animals get their nitrogen from plants. Plants fix that nitrogen from the air. You do not need to have animals to get nitrogen. You can do crop rotation with a higher nitrogen fixing plant and then mixing in another one, or you can compost with plants and create fertilizer that way. And using poop and blood is why we have a higher risk of E. coli on plants than we otherwise would. From the study, quote, bovine manure is a well-known source of foodborne pathogenic bacteria. This next statement of his goes to show that he isn't really doing thorough research before trying to refute my claims.
Or you can use synthetic fertilizers made of fossil fuels. But fossil fuels are just animals that have been dead for a longer time.
So we're talking about fossil fuels to make synthetic fertilizers. He appears to think they're from animals. I don't know if he said this wrong or if he actually just needs a little bit more science education, but fossil fuels is not literally from like dinosaurs or larger animals. No, it's from microbes, particularly ones that photosynthesize year after year after year, being pressurized into this fuel. It's a really old, stale sunlight, which sadly has a really dirty result. From Encyclopedia Britannica, quote, most of the fossil fuel material we use today comes from algae, bacteria, and plants. And so when we're looking at things like phytoplankton, that's technically of the kingdom Protista. It's not a plant, but it's doing photosynthesis, and this is kind of the theme. He says, no, animals is the solution. Animals is actually what's good. The reality is, it's something like photosynthesis, the hallmark of plants, that is actually doing it. He's just upside down. And I don't think synthetic fertilizer is awesome or anything, but it's worth saying you can make synthetic fertilizer from renewable energy, from solar power, wind power. You use the Haber-Bosch process that we normally use, but instead of getting the hydrogen from methane, you can just use electrolysis using water and electricity. And then there's a high-pressure component, which you can also do with renewable energy, and there's a team in Australia working on that. So, just worth noting. The next point from my comebacks video is that, if you're getting attacked by a family member about nutritional adequacy of a vegan diet, you can just hand them the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics position on vegetarian and vegan diets. It says that adequately planned vegan diets are suitable for all stages of life. Here is his response.
Mike finds the one organization that confirms his bias. It's a confirmation bias. And he says, see, they said it's okay.
It's not just one organization, it's a ton of organizations, as you can see here, and this isn't even all of them. Then he says that I was pulling an appeal to authority fallacy, and I will agree that just because something is an authority doesn't mean that it's right, but it also doesn't mean that they're wrong, and he then appeals to a lesser authority, which is a German dietetics association.
There is another organization that says vegan diets are absolutely not good. And an example of that is the German Nutrition Society.
But it's not just that the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics is an authority, it's 100,000 nutrition professionals and it's using science to determine their position on a vegetarian and vegan diet. The Academies paper has a lot of research at the end of it. The German one also has a lot of research, but looking at some of the studies, they cite this one, which says, yeah, we could use more research, but a vegan diet is suitable for pregnancy if it's adequately planned. Furthermore, the Germans' biggest concern was B12, and going back to this Swiss study, there was no statistically significant difference in deficiencies in B12 between the omnivores and the meat eaters, and that's because, we've got these fortified foods everywhere, and it's not a huge study, but it's a good representation of how people are eating nowadays. And the main point here is a vegan diet suitable for humans? Is it suitable for all stages of life? One of those really important stages being pregnancy, and that brings me to the topic of folic acid, because folic acid deficiencies can result in some of our most common birth defects, which are a huge driver of infant mortality. That's neural tube defects and, various brain and neurological system defects. And looking to that study, once again, the Swiss study, we saw folic acid deficiency in 60% of omnivores, 60% of meat eaters, and only 13% of vegans. That's over 4 times the rate of deficiency for this major birth defect nutrient. Why are vegans so much higher? Because they eat folate in legumes and other plants, which are great sources, and clearly there is a plant deficiency for the average omnivore. My point here is not to say that vegans are perfect, but if you're going to point at vegans and say how bad they are, it's worth looking at things like this. Think about how many freaking birth defects would have been prevented if people were eating as much folate as vegans do. Next, I talked about the canine thing, where people will say, canines, though, we have these super sharp canines. First of all, how they're not sharp enough to actually pierce any reasonable thickness of flesh. Then I go on about how it's an appeal to nature fallacy to say that just because something happens in nature means it's ethically okay. A lot of horrible things happen in nature, like infanticide, murder. There's incest. I think most people would say that's not a justification to do those things. He says, no, actually, you're the one doing the fallacy, so let me know how convinced you are.
Then Mike goes on to misstate the appeal to nature fallacy.
But in the end, it's just an appeal to nature fallacy, the idea that because something happens in nature, we should do it, and that is just completely wrong morally, and so forth.
Really, what the appeal to nature fallacy says, just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's good. What we need to do is go one step further and say meat is the most nourishing source of food for humans. It's not because it's natural, it's because it's the best source of nourishment.
It's also the best source of carcinogenic heme iron, carcinogenic heterocyclic amines, also a great source of cholesterol and saturated fat, which clog arteries, while heart disease is our leading cause of death. He even admits that the canine argument on its own is not a strong argument, but then goes off to say that because we have these certain traits that make it so we can kill animals, that we did it and we evolved to do it.
But our adaptations to hunting are our big human brains, our throwing shoulder, our ability to dissipate heat. You can go chase a gazelle, and even though a gazelle is much faster than you, you can run it to death.
But no, just having a throwing arm and being smart enough to work in groups, I'm sorry, it doesn't mean that you've been eating enough meat to anatomically change how you process it and make it healthy for you. Maybe if we ate enough meat, then we would evolve to not get heart disease from eating all this stuff, and a vegan diet wouldn't be the only one clinically shown to reverse heart disease because of how good plants are for us. The longest living population on planet Earth is the Adventists. The Adventist vegetarians live the longest, and about 1 in 5 of them are vegan. These are people that eat no meat. They should be dying the soonest if we're meant to eat a lot of meat.
A vegan diet is not as healthy as a meat-based diet.
I'm getting mauled by gnats right now, but as a vegan, I will just take it, okay? He then talks about vegan smugness.
Vegans are smug, and if what they believed were true, great, be smug. But unfortunately, what they believe is not true.
Now, I could respond with words, or I could just respond by making a really smug face. Checkmate. This next point is really important because I made a lot of ex-vegan videos in hopes of not letting the hysteria of a few influencers make people think that the vegan diet is not adequate. And of course, that's the exact conclusion that he draws.
We have testimonials all over the world. Their teeth demineralized, started falling out of their head. They felt terrible. They had incredible pain in their digestive tract. They had blood in their stools. Their bodies fell apart on a vegan diet.
He's like, we got anecdotes right here. And I love how he says that all these vegans did it right as he scrolls right over Tim Sheaf's ex-vegan video.
The number one criticism of a vegan to an ex-vegan is, you just didn't do it right.
The guy who literally drank his own urine, his own pee, and didn't eat for 35 days. Adequately planned.
People that were committed to veganism for 6, 7, 8, 9, even over 10 years, and were doing it as best as they could. The diet didn't work for them.
Now, it's not right to say that everyone who failed either did veganism right or did veganism wrong, but he points to, some of the more severe symptoms that people had, and those people, it's clear they had extreme diets. And even in cases where it looked like people were eating properly, you look at Ravana, she looks like she had a balanced diet. With a little bit of investigation, you can see that not only was she only drinking alkaline water, watch my video on her for more details on that, but as I learned from Lily Koi Hawaii, she has several videos on colonics. Her problem that made her quit was SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth from getting colonic bacteria in your small intestines. She was literally pumping water into her butt, pushing that colonic bacteria up. You get the picture. You get it. I believe that you understand it. You got it. Poop in the thing. And think about the ridiculous amount of health failures of people living on an omnivorous diet. Think if they made a video every single time that happened. It would just be like all of you. It would be the entire YouTube. The YouTube. And it's also worth talking about social pressures, which have a major factor here. I mean, look at Ravana. Vegan year after year, marries a meat eater, no longer vegan. Raw Lyman, vegan, starts dating a low-carb meat guy, no longer vegan. Bonnie Rebecca, her boyfriend quit veganism, no longer vegan. And we can look to the anecdotes, we can look to influencers, or we can look at the actual health data. Do vegans have better health outcomes? The reality is yes, they have lower levels of chronic disease, they have that lower level of mortality, that means dying less. They have about 78% lower total risk of diabetes from the Adventist studies. Again, that lower cancer. We've got the lower hypertension, lower hyper and hypothyroidism. We, of course, have the interventions reversing diseases on a vegan diet and the average normal BMI of vegans. All of these things are painting a different picture than Chris does. Not saying vegan diets are invincible, but it's like, you have a 90% lower rate of a disease. Somebody gets that disease on a vegan diet. They're still going to be like, I got this on a vegan diet, and then quit and be like, it's the vegan diet's fault. And this is probably the winning claim by him for the whole video.
We can see later in this video or in future videos that veganism is not morally or ethically superior to a highly carnivorous diet.
But when responding to my points on humane slaughter, this is where he really hit a new level, really kind of shocked me on his ethical views on killing animals.
But livestock animals don't have our ability to give or withhold consent.
So animals don't have the ability to give consent. That doesn't mean that they are consenting to die, consenting for you to kill them. Yeah, I taped her mouth shut and then assaulted her. She couldn't consent, so therefore it was okay. But his reasoning behind this is saying, animals are so intellectually inferior that they can't actually comprehend a risk of death. So they can't want to not die, so it's all just raw instinct, which is apparently meaningless.
Animals don't want to live, and they don't want not to die. They are programmed by nature simply to get their genetics to the next generation.
Dude, do you really think that animals don't want to live?
A rescued dairy cow, whose previous babies were all taken from her, hides her newborn calf in a field so the humans won't find her and take her away.
And do you really think that a pig, an animal that has enough sentience to recognize themselves in the mirror, doesn't have any comprehension or notion of death? We're talking about an animal that's smarter than a dog. So it would be okay to just go up to people's dogs and stab their dogs because they have no comprehension of life or death. Chris thinks it's okay to stab dogs, just want to make that known. Comprehension of death, though. Comprehension of death is not what should be the factor that allows you to kill or not kill a living being. But I will say it's no surprise that somebody who's taken the time to debunk a vegan self-defense video would have these types of views about animals. That they're trying to erase animal sentience at every opportunity possible. But from the Cambridge Declaration on Consciousness, from a bunch of neuroscientists and Stephen Hawking, animals do have the substrates to exhibit consciousness, and they do exhibit highly advanced behavior. So you are unnecessarily ending a verifiably sentient animal's life at the human equivalent age of a toddler. As you can see on this chart, that's a fact. And this is not humane. Now on to that desert island topic, where a meat eater might ask a vegan, what if you were stranded on a deserted island? Would you eat the animals? And so here's what he says.
I'll just eat what the animals are eating. If you were hypothetically stranded on a deserted island, where all they had on this island were grass and cattle, you would just eat the grass? Cows have a 4-chambered stomach. What if this island was inhabited by our primate cousins? Those gorillas look pretty strong. A gorilla has a colon the size of a football. You have one the size of a pinky.
What? I didn't know that my pinky was 5 feet long and 3 inches wide. So the statement about eating the plants that the animals eat, that was meant to be like a thought-provoking question, not an ironclad, single-shot logical response. But he didn't include my most important point in that video, which is that people are trying to use this to get validation for their habits, when in reality, the situation on a deserted island is very different than the abundance we have in the grocery store, where you can choose whatever you want to eat. This is not reality. This is not the situation. Now we get on the topic of building muscle on a vegan diet.
And he shows you photos of 2 humongous steroid users. Obvious steroid users.
Wait, but how do the steroids work on a vegan diet if you don't get enough protein? I call this the Chris Kruger paradox. We got super buff vegan natty builders. We got people like Mischa, Janiec, who took a doping test, super expensive doping test. Turns out he's not on steroids. And we also have people like Nima Delgado, who claims to have never taken steroids, and he's never eaten meat, and yet he's an IFBB pro and super jacked. And it's like, how is this even a point when everybody who's eating meat is slamming down protein powders anyway to try and get buff? Like, and I love how he just can't handle the fact that Kendrick Ferris was the only male weightlifter from Team USA to make it to the Olympics and set a weightlifting record in the process. He has to spin it in a way that makes the vegan diet bad.
After going vegan, he even broke the American record for his weight class. Tremendous accomplishment. And that was at the Olympic trials. Later at the Olympic Games, his strength was already coming down. A vegan diet halted his progress, destroyed his gains, and ultimately cost him a chance at an Olympic gold medal.
No, it wasn't a vegan diet that robbed him of the gold. It was a vegan diet that got him to the Olympics, it appears. And people's performance varies. This isn't... Also, just recently interviewed Jeff Palmer in a video. He gained 45 pounds of what is clearly muscle on a vegan diet. The point is, you can gain muscle on a vegan diet, and that's what matters here. And I have a whole elite vegan athletes video you can check out for more athletes that are vegan. But now let's move on to harvest deaths.
Mike refers us to an incredibly biased article with a ridiculous graph. And what it says is that per million calories, grains, fruits, and vegetables result in way fewer animal deaths than anything else.
He said this chart that looks at the harvest deaths is bogus because it's only taking into account grain deaths. And we're talking about combine deaths in growing plants here. And this is showing that eating animals not just kills more animals by eating those animals, but also by harvesting the grain to feed them. So despite this chart accurately representing how 99% of the population eats, he has to sidestep it and say grass-fed beef diets only, though, which is ridiculous because A, grass-fed beef is really expensive, and B, we just don't have the room on planet Earth to do that.
But if you eat grass-fed beef, you can have zero collateral damage when cattle are free to roam. You're not killing extra animals by running your farm equipment over them.
So he wants to say that a grass-fed beef-only diet would actually have less of an animal impact, less animal deaths than a normal vegan diet. I've heard this a lot lately, and everybody always forgets to tally a lot of things. First of all, grass feeding an animal doesn't mean that they're only eating the grass on that pasture. And looking to a large portion of the US where we have winter, we need a ton of supplemental grass or other forages to be grown in order to support them. In fact, animals require more feed during the winter because it's cold, so you'd have to grow even more. And of course, harvesting those crops is with a combine. It's doing the same thing. To demonstrate the scale of this, let's look at this UC Davis chart on water use during the drought in California. 80% of the world's almonds plus pistachios is 1 bar, and that's dwarfed by the water used just to grow forages for a small portion of livestock in a warmer climate, so think we're growing a ton. So you don't just need to grow these forages to feed animals in winter, it's also in dry climates and just any plot that isn't producing enough calories. Another death toll they don't count is that we end up killing predators to protect livestock. USDA kills millions of predators to protect livestock, and people are, pushing species to become endangered or even extinct in certain cases because of this. And grazing takes a lot of land. That is why it is the main driver of Amazon destruction. About 80% of Amazon destruction, a lot of that is clearing land for grazing, and it takes even more land to do fully grass-fed because from these industry statistics, it's about 150% to 200% of the time to get that animal up to slaughter weight because of the nutrient density of grass versus grain. None of those were counted by Chris when he said that it is 1.7 cow deaths per million calories, or it's, 1.7 deaths per million calories of grain.
So now you can slaughter 1.7 cows to achieve approximately 1 million calories.
And pardon me for being speciesist, but I think it's better to be killing one mouse accidentally than one cow purposefully. Cows have a higher level of sentience and experience, I believe, although I would rather kill neither. And obviously Chris eats chicken, all these people eat chicken, and look at that, you know, one animal death for just 1,400 calories. Just like, where are you, what are you talking? Yeah, you're trying to make these arguments. It's amazing, yeah. Don't even get me started on how grass-fed cows emit over 3 times as much methane and the implications of that down the line. And I love how he launches into this weird like hypothetical scenario where there's a vegan who's just eating wheat because it was looking at grain. Of course, legumes are another thing that probably have a similar animal impact, but here's what he says about the wheat.
You go on a grain-based diet so that all you're eating is whole wheat pasta. Well, guess what? That diet is 75% carbohydrate and 0 complete protein.
Again, he's just like factually wrong here. Here's Chronometer, 2,000 calories of whole wheat. It actually meets all of the essential amino acid requirements for an adult male. Just wrong. I don't understand. He then screenshots this article, which I don't think he showed the title of because it is laughably biased.
These researchers found that to get 100 kilograms of complete protein, you only needed 2.2 cows. You would need to kill 55 field mice to harvest that much protein. You actually kill 25 times the number of animals to get the same amount of protein, except the wheat protein is incomplete.
Bases its mouth deaths off bombing mice infestations with pesticides in Australia with the worst type of grain farming. And looking closer at actual harvest deaths, it's worth looking at this study, which took 33 field mice and they put radio collars on them, and they found that only one of them died from the actual combine. So the combine death rates are really low. They did see that about half of them died later on through predation. It's unclear how much of that was because of the exposure. You know, the crops are gone and the predators can see them, or if it was just natural predation. But it'd be worth it to try and explore ways to get less predator deaths after harvesting. One example is after harvesting, you can actually crimp down the stalks that are left over, which creates a little bit more cover, and then later acts as weed control for the next round of crops. Interesting stuff, but moving on. In summary, Chris is just demonstrably factually wrong on several levels here. His fear-mongering about having higher blood protein levels completely backfired. It's associated with less mortality, further away from a protein deficiency, and so forth. All of the nutrient claims he made about things like vitamin A or just don't seem to be founded either. He just literally made that up. He just threw it out there. He also has what I consider to be a very disturbing view on consent and killing animals and just some crazy moral ethical gymnastics there. I hope you agree with me. And finally, he just got like some basic scientific things wrong. Looking back to the fossil fuels coming from animals and things like that, I mean, I just don't think he's a great source for scientific based information at this point in time. So I hope he does realize he was wrong on some really basic things like essential amino acids and, maybe reevaluates a little bit of his worldview. It's asking a lot, but we'll see. But let me know what you thought about his claims down below in the comments, and let me know if you want me to do a folic acid sort of birth defect video if you'd be interested in that. Also want to mention that I had to film this video twice because a piece of like cotton seed thing got on my face and it just looked like I had a ginormous zit. So filming videos takes time, so if you want to support me on Patreon, much appreciated. Links in the description. All right, that's it for today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.